how many of them have connections with the World Economic Forum? How many of them are tied up with what they call the Australian Davos connection?
It means valuing water, but it means thinking not about public and private as two separate worlds. It is, as Mariana says, about equity.
The Murray Darling factory and the company has enjoyed a fantastic time and career of dairy food production in Victoria, and what we saw is Murray Darling had a whole lot of problems turn up, in so much as with the water being taken off the land and the farmers going broke, they had a very, very big drop in milk production. So they ended up getting a new managing director. Now, Murray Darling was a farmer-owned cooperative, as were a number of them around the place. The dairy farmers actually owned the company. So what we saw was a new managing director came into Murray Darling, and through a series of things, whatever you want to say, we won't go into that too much because there's a bit on the legal side, we saw Murray Darling was floated. And Murray Darling then was sold ultimately to foreign corporates, a company from Canada. The reason that Murray Darling was sold apparently was because it was in financial problems. And we have to ask the question, why was that the case? And we look back a little bit to say the managing director who took over was also in the rice industry, and a farmer-operated co-op that he was a part of, he tried to float that as well. So we're seeing a bit of a pattern here of Australian farmer-owned cooperative companies that for some reason appear to be getting into financial difficulty and then having to be floated on the stock exchange. And then they become vulnerable to being bought up by foreign multinational corporates. And then what we've seen is it's shut down. And if we look at the multinational corporates we're talking about, how many of them have connections with the World Economic Forum? How many of them are tied up with what they call the Australian Davos connection?
Welcome to the New Economics of Water press conference at the World Economic Forum in Davos. The Global Commission on the Economics of Water was launched today.
Going to have any chance of mitigating climate, water is behind it. Handling the climate, the food crisis requires massive investments in fresh water. So today, for the first time ever, we need to consider fresh water as a common good for all of humanity. We are ourselves changing the rainfall on planet Earth. And now we need to put the economics of water, not only in terms of monetary values, but also in terms of governance, in terms of recognizing water as a commons that we now need to manage as a broad systems approach.
Mariana's going to talk about the new economics required.
So one of the issues is, if water is as urgent of a problem as some of the top climate scientists like Johan have been telling us, how do we turn it into an urgent problem? And that means seeing the role of government, which is so important. It's not the only actor, but it's a key actor, as a market co-creator and a market shaper in the system. So the policies themselves need to be framed in terms of shaping and not market fixing, because that's just going to patch up the system. It really is this kind of getting rid of this public-private divide. This is going to require huge amounts of collaboration, huge amounts of co-investment and finance, and how to actually design that with a common good lens is one of the really innovative things that this group is going to provide. Issues of equity and justice are incredibly important, not using fluffy language like we're all in this together. Actually, there's going to be some real changes that will have to be made to business models, to the way governments work, to the way they relate one to another. So issues to make sure that this is an inclusive approach, is equitable, and has justice at the center is also part of the common good.
This was an initiative in the first instance of the Dutch government. They are co-chairs together with the Tajikistan government of next year's UN Water Conference. It's the first UN Water Conference in 46 years. It's not just another commission, and the report we're coming out with is not just another good, interesting report. It is really aimed at mobilizing action mobilizing changes in government, mobilizing finance, and mobilizing the scale-up of technologies and solutions that can enable everyone in every corner of the world to have access to clean water. And it's only going to be possible if we take action not just where local problems arise, but if we take action globally. It's closing the trilogy that started with the Nick Stern report on climate change and the Partha Dasgupta report on biodiversity. Water is part of that trilogy. We're not going to solve the climate crisis if we don't solve water. We're not going to solve the food crisis or the energy security crisis if we don't solve water. And water has been the most neglected of these issues. The Commission is going to be advancing the new science, the new economics, the new governance structures required, the new financing approaches required, and so that the planet can sustain itself. It's because something is going wrong globally. Something went wrong globally. So we've got to address this at the global level. And it means fundamentally a few shifts in the way we think about this in international governance and national governance. Co-investment. We've got to pool together our resources, invest effectively to solve this problem. We've got to find ways in which we mobilize private resources within regulated markets to address the public good. And we've got to find ways in which the public sector operates on a disciplined basis and on a financially sustainable basis. It means valuing water, but it means thinking not about public and private as two separate worlds, two separate economic or financial worlds, but working together. It is, as Mariana says, about equity. Because if we don't solve those equity problems, we're all going to be affected. And that's what it means when we say it is now a global commons issue, when we want to solve the problem of the climate crisis. They go hand in hand. Equity is everyone's interest, everyone's self-interest, everywhere in the world.
Did we solve that? Like, did we actually manage to vaccinate everyone in the world? No. So highlighting water as a global commons and what it means to work together and see it both out of that kind of global commons perspective, but also the self-interest perspective, because it is. And water is something that people understand. You know, climate change is a bit abstract. Some people understand it really well. Some understand it a bit. Some just don't understand it. Water, every kid knows how important it is to have water. There's also something about really getting citizen engagement around this and really, in some ways, experimenting with this notion of the common good. Can we actually deliver this time in ways that we have failed miserably other times? And hopefully we won't keep failing on the other things, but anyway.
The costs of all of this. The world will have to spend about $300 billion per year in order that low and middle income countries can solve this problem. So all this is about governance systems. How do you value water? How do you stop the wastage? How do you improve farmers' incomes? So when we think of cost, yes, it'll cost something, and the world has to pay for it, but we're actually going to gain a lot in economic terms, which means individual lives, communities' lives will be much better off.
My question for the panelists is, what does success look like at the end of this 2-year initiative?
The solutions exist. The solutions exist a lot more than the solutions already exist for climate change. They need to be financed, we need proper governance, and we need to scale up the solutions. It's like they say, necessity is the mother of invention, right? Necessity is also the mother of governance, is the mother of solution-oriented governance. It's a mother of governance arrangements where this is not just the responsibility of water officials or ministry in charge of water. It's a whole of government responsibility and a whole of society responsibility. Better governance in the interests of ordinary people everywhere in the world.
Victim number one of all the global changes we are occurring, I mean, both in terms of climate change and environmental change, is water. One has to recognize that adapting to change in the world we live in today is about managing water. We foresee a new paradigm of water as a common good, which has to be governed and managed as such. We will be looking at the value of water and considering different novel economic policy measures, of which one may be, for example, putting some form of price on water in order to guide and give incentives, but not as a price to punish those who are poor, but rather to reward those that are stewards of fresh water for the common good. And it's really about equity about governance, about management, and about collaboration. We're also looking at virtual water trading, about how can we collaborate as a world community with regards to safeguarding the flow of virtual water behind all the food that we trade in the world, for example. Quite a long list of advice and recommendations.
The world needs a green revolution to solve the climate crisis. In the next 30 years, step by step, transition in one area after another, the world has to turn green. It's not going to succeed unless we have a blue revolution, unless we change fundamentally the way we manage water globally. It's global. It requires new governance systems, new financing, new ways of scaling up. Scale up what works well to a degree that's never been seen before. We can solve this problem.
We've seen Klaus Schwab from the World Economic Forum talk about how their members, their young global leaders, have penetrated the cabinets and governments of many countries around the world. The Australian government have done some things that you would look at and go, they were horrendous decisions against the best advice and in the worst interest of the Australian people and our country. So I think that we need to watch this space and investigate this further and look further as to the role that the World Economic Forum is playing, the role that the Australian government is playing, and for that matter, our state and territory governments. Because my opinion is, based on the evidence that I can see, is that our governments, so to speak, are certainly not working in the best interest of Australia and the Australian people. It looks to me as if they're working in the best interest of foreign powers, not necessarily foreign country powers. This all ties in with what we're seeing with the food capacity being destroyed here, and it matches in with what we're seeing overseas. We're seeing stories from all over the world of their governments making policies that are destroying their agricultural sectors. So this is a massive alert. This is hugely, hugely important. So people need to really switch onto this issue. Up until probably 12 months ago, I used to get TV stations, radio stations who would ring me to do interviews on issues and subjects, you know what I mean? Now, they don't want to know for some strange reason. Yeah.